with lacrosse, it's synonymous with success. And that's something the football program really hasn't had a lot of for the past couple seasons. But man, yesterday, did they really change the script on that? And just astonishing, incredible performance. And again, last week, you remember I had no faith in this team. There was no way they're being a nationally ranked powerhouse like Delaware, ranked 14th, 15th at the time of the game yesterday. Not only did they win, they won convincingly. It's like they heard that rant and said, Ken, we're about to prove you wrong. Tyson Lawton in particular, 99 yards and for an incredible touchdown run. And it was the first play for Stony Brook on the offensive side. And that really set the tempo of the game, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. And the great thing about it is that, as you were saying off air just before we went on today, this team has basically established a personality of Jekyll and Hyde, that they lose the games they should win and win the games they should lose.
Yes, exactly. And you're going into the start of the season, one of the games you really wouldn't have Stony Brook to win would have been that game against Delaware. You'd probably think maybe a couple weeks ago against Rhode Island or versus Fordham, they'd be easy write-offs for wins. But no, they got their first conference win since beating UAlbany last year, and it came against the nationally ranked powerhouse.
Well, this is what blows my mind.
Yes.
One play, 99 yards, which means all he has to do is trip over himself to get 100 for the day. But Tyson Lawton, 99-yard touchdown run, team's first play from scrimmage, and that set the tone for the rest of the day. But before we start talking about the rest of the day, I want to say, and of course, it is mentioned on StonyBrookAthletics.com, that it was, and it was mentioned everywhere, that it was the longest play from scrimmage in history. It's about as any further back, it's a safety. Okay, so 99 yards is about as much as you can get. Oliver Bridges, 1991. Oliver Bridges, that's a blast from way past. That's 30 years ago at Pace, D3. Okay, Liberty Conference. The fantasy conference that I always want the Division I schools in New York to form that they actually had from Division III football teams. But anyway, moving on. The longest pass play still stands at 91 yards. That happened twice in their history. But 192 yards, like I said, you had 99 on one play, which means that you got about 90-something for the rest of the day, which was also still pretty good. 2 touchdowns. You got another one after that.
Yeah, he set another career best, Matt. 192, really 194 yards. Had a couple of stops at the line, but 192 yards, which bested his previous best he set earlier in the year, which was around the 140s.
Right, and he's becoming. You know what he's becoming? First of all, we'll get into this later on. That sometimes I'm a little bit behind the curve on pop culture. But we'll talk about this sports tropes. The standard things you see as part of every sports story you either read online or we tell it to you live or something like that. Sports trope. Superstar emerging on a mediocre team. And Tyson Lawton, there you go.
Yeah.
Tyson Lawton is emerging as that star. Now, of course, in college, that means you build a team around him, and a couple of years down the road, depending on how far along he is in his development, you can build a team around him. Unfortunately, he's a redshirt junior, so you got another year with him.
1 year.
So you better build quick.
Yes. And for sure you're getting a new quarterback next year, so you're going to have to really build quick around him, seeing as a lot of the key pieces now are going to graduate. Obviously, Tykel Fields, even in the offensive line, Kyle Nunez, probably the 2 other best offensive players are about to graduate.
So Now, Chuck Fiore, of course, has this long history. We've been saying it, ground chuck this and ground chuck that. But could this be, and again, another sports trope, could this be a turning point? And you're wondering about it, and you say, where was this performance all year for everybody? I mean, Lawton's been good. Okay, fine. And was better and good yesterday. But he didn't do it alone.
Yeah, and we have Anthony here joining us too. Anthony on the call yesterday.
Oh, good. Because, Anthony, I want your take on this. First of all, it is every play-by-play person's dream to call a play like that.
Oh, yes. A 99-yard touchdown. It's everyone's dream.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was the first play of the game for Stony Brook. It was a nice hole by the offensive line. They played a little too close, and he broke it for 99 yards. It was exactly what Stony Brook needed. The momentum was on their side. The game was close for like the first half or so. But I think really the defense in the second half is really what ultimately shifted the game in Stony Brook's favor. And obviously Delaware's quarterback got injured late, and that kind of sealed it. But this is a huge win for them, honestly, because we've been talking about it all season. They tend to lose games where they're supposed to win, and they're in positions to win said games, but they just haven't been able to finish it off. And in their past game, they were able to get it done.
So you've been watching this team all year. Is it fair for me to be confident that this could mark a turning point?
Absolutely, because I mentioned it during the broadcast. Their schedule for the remainder of the season is relatively favorable because you're playing Richmond and Maine back-to-back, who are right ahead of you in the standings. Then you play against Villanova, which is a tough opponent because they're the second seed in the CAA. But then you end your season against UAlbany, who's the worst team in the CAA right now. So you definitely have a shot, absolutely.
I think playoffs, again, sports trope, playoffs. Don't talk about playoffs. I know I'm dating myself with that, but go find on YouTube, Jim Mora. But in any case, that's not what you're looking for right now. What you're looking for is what we just mentioned. A foundation for Tyson Lawton to build on in his senior year.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd say some of the other offensive pieces as well that stood out, because Lawton, obviously, player of the game. If Mike were here, obviously, he's christened the Player of the Week award after him, or for good reasons, because of performances like that. But overall, other guys stepped up as well, like Sean Harris Jr. again, getting another touchdown, having a good day receiving-wise. Tykel Fields, 13 of 18. He's above the 50% mark, which is what you want to see from a guy who's been struggling over the year the past couple weeks. And he only needed to throw for 135 yards, but he was still able to get his fourth touchdown pass and fifth touchdown run of the season, which the runs is tied for third in the CDA for rushing touchdowns. But again, that's really the good thing. You're starting to establish now these pieces of your offense you can turn to, number one. And number two is, I think, the more important part, where the reason why these guys were losing these close games is because they couldn't convert. That first play of the game showed you they were able to convert, at least in yesterday's game. When there was a scoring opportunity, they were going to get it into the end zone, or they were going to create their own opportunities, find the right holes, find the right lanes to go through, and reach the end zone. And that's really been the key for the Seawolves team, because when the opportunities presented itself, they've fallen flat on their face, not converting, turning the ball over, or settling for three. They scored several touchdowns in this game, and they were obviously the biggest factor in this win today or yesterday.
I'll tell you something else. Another column in Tyquel Field's stats that stands out for me, and it's a nice big goose egg in it, interceptions. He took care of the ball. And when you have a team, and we've been saying this over and over again, that doesn't necessarily rely on flashy passing or fast receivers, that is as nuts and bolts as this team is, with a great running back, you need a quarterback that doesn't let you down, and Fields did not let the Seawolves down yesterday.
Yeah, agreed. And I think the big thing too, obviously, is with a great run game, don't have to turn to him too much. When your rushing is averaging about over 5 yards per carry, you get 3 rushing touchdowns on the game. They getting 273 yards gained just on the ground was obviously a big contribution towards Seal's success. It allowed them to play their game on their ground game and not have to worry or shift to the pass. Even when the game was close after Delaware scored 10 straight, Stony Brook remained persistent on the ground, and it paid off for them, as I said, with those 3 touchdown runs on the afternoon. But they really, again, established themselves, and it was key, and something for them to find further success they're going to have to continue doing over the next month.
Well, the next month, as we keep saying over and over again, and as Anthony said, should play into their hands very nicely. You got homecoming, and everybody loves homecoming, of course. They got the Richmond Spiders in town, Maine and Villanova on the road. But what's most important is another thing we didn't mention, is that the schneid is broken, that the Seawolves won at home for the first time in 2 years. And that sets homecoming up perfectly for a follow-up.
Agreed. Homecoming's always an emotional game. Usually the most attended game of the season. Usually a sellout or close to it, for good reason, obviously. So many folks returning. This year, probably more significant than ever, due to there being none last year for obvious reasons. So,
right.
And you're right.
Hall of Fame. The Seawolves Hall of Fame is going to admit 2 classes like the Baseball Hall of Fame did about a month and a half ago.
That's right. And again, the key, as we said, is these are games that Stony Brook should be winning, because compared to their opponents, they are more likely to get themselves in scoring situations, scoring opportunities. And as we saw in the second half, this defense can step up. We've seen over the past few weeks, they've been able to hold on and then fall off. Here was a bit of the inverse, where they fell off, kind of fell in that rut they had at the end of last week, and then in the second half, they really woke up. But I think if you're able to see the defense hold Richmond to similar numbers, and considering Richmond, this isn't much of an argument, but they are a worse team. The talent level is not quite there like it was with Delaware. If the Seals could do basically what they did against Delaware, just repeat it again, it should be a pretty easy evening for Stony Brook squad.
Yeah, I definitely agree. If Stony Brook follows the same philosophy that they've been all season, which is just running the ball, giving it to Tyson Lawton or any one of the Seawolves backs, if they can keep it on the ground, play keep away, and get early scores. And as Matt said earlier, if Tykel Fields can be turnover free, obviously he did have the fumble in that game, which ended up not costly, but if you can have a turnover free game, and I think the main difference in this game against Delaware was their defense in the second half, because you have to remember the game was relatively close in that fourth quarter. It could have went either way, but ultimately it came down to the strip sack by Mekhi Smith. I don't know if you guys talked about it already, but that for me was the play that essentially turned the game and basically put it in Stony Brook's favor for the rest of the way. Because after that, you're set up, basically in the red zone. Tycho Fields obviously snuck it in for the touchdown, but that defense really stepped up in the second half. In their previous games, the defense tended to falter a lot because they were very tired. They had they just weren't playing, the right way.
I'd add as well that they were figured out by the coaches, man. That's honestly what I believe, is that the game plan didn't really switch too much in between halves, especially when it's working so well in the first half. Obviously, coaches isn't really going to switch up much in the second. And I think that was their downfall, to where they didn't adjust to what the offense on the other side was doing in the second. as they were changing their game plan around what Stony Brook was doing so well, and it ultimately hurt them in the end. So here, as you said, that big sack was, as you said, really was the turning point, and you saw the pendulum shift right after, Anthony.
Yeah, and the other thing too I wanted to mention really quickly, just for the future too, I saw their defense. As I mentioned, they did play really well in the second half. But one person I did want to mention really quickly for Delaware is Thyrick Pitts.
Oh, yes.
Obviously, he had Delaware's 2 touchdowns in the game. But I think one thing you have to be careful about if you're Stony Brook's defense moving forward is playing this man-to-man coverage and giving opposing offenses these one-on-one shots. Obviously, not every team is going to have a talented receiver like a Thyrick Pitts. But just to look forward to the future, you don't always necessarily want to take those risks, leaving your DBs on an island. However, with that being said, they've been able to combat that really well, throwing in different zones, different blitzes, and stuff like that. And overall, a pretty clean game from both sides. Obviously, the strip sack being the turning point of the game. But ultimately, when it came down to it, the defense stepped up and the offense performed the way it was supposed to all season. Tycho Fields, he played the game that he was supposed to. Tyson Lawn was his usual self. And the other thing, too, that Stony Brook did as well, which I actually really liked, was that they went to a bunch of different receivers, right? It wasn't the same few guys. It wasn't your Sean Harris Jr., your Khalil Newtons, your Delonte Helms Juniors of the world. You also had, Teddy Alford. I mean, we haven't really mentioned. He, had a couple catches yesterday. You also had like Thomas Dutton. You had Hunter Hayek, so on and so forth. I think, especially moving later on in the season, if they can give other guys bigger roles in the Stony Brook offense, I think that can definitely cause a lot of different problems for opposing defenses. And I think that's something they could definitely look to in the future.
Absolutely. Again, because when you look at the Seawolves defense, and part of the reason why they struggled so much is because, especially in those second halves, other coaches knew, all right, their ground game is working, so we only have to solely focus on it because they're really not turning to the pass game too much. And there's not, even once we stop the run, there's not much they can do with the pass because they're not really turning to it in most cases. And you're right. One of the few things you could obviously point out for the Seawolves that was a negative is obviously they were outpassed. Not that it really mattered. And Delaware obviously had to pass when you're behind the game, virtually all game. But yeah, they were out-received 199 to 133. But to your point, last week there were only 4 receivers that were utilized in the game for the Seawolves. As you said, they were able to get several guys the ball, really, turn it around. Yeah, it was only 13 receptions, and your longest reception was 26 yards. Khalil Newton finished with 44 yards on the day. You look at the other side, Tyreek Pitts, 7 receptions, 115 yards. So you obviously, you don't have your star in that sense that's getting you the big numbers, like we saw with Sean Harris last week. But at the same time, just establishing you have a passing game is big, just to prove, you're not this one-dimensional team. And when the run game isn't necessarily going the way you like, you have a pass game to turn to. So that's how it's going to be key for the Seawolves as it progresses down the rest of the season.
Not only that, you need a pass game to keep the defenses honest, because otherwise they just pack up the middle and your runs get stuffed, which is what was happening to Stony Brook a lot during the course of the season.
And
as
a bit ironic.
Mentioned, I want to go over the standings here in the CAA right now, because right now Maine and Stony Brook are tied at 1-3. Maine, of course, is an upcoming Stony Brook opponent at Maine. Richmond is 0-3. This is just conference record, not overall. We don't care about overall. Albany's 0-4. So, opportunity knocks. The only big obstacle in terms of talent level that Stony Brook faces the rest of the year is Villanova, who is at the top of the conference with a 3-0 record. I mean, it's still a logjam because they're 3-0, and James Madison and Rhode Island are 3-1. William and Mary, Elon, New Hampshire, and Towson are all 2-1. Delaware is 2-2. So there's still a lot that can happen over the course of the next 4 weeks.
And just to
I'm
add
not
on to it,
necessarily, my expectations aren't high.
I was going to say,
Stony
just
Brook
to
win 3
add
out
on,
of 4?
I was going to say, to me, it's definitely possible, but I feel like we had these conversations last year, or the past couple of years, rather, when they would play each other, and it would usually be Stony Brook on the losing end, one way or another, with the exception of Albany, who they beat last time out. But again, this is the Stony Brook team we saw yesterday is the team we have to see throughout. It comes down to basically continuing to capitalize on your scoring opportunities or creating scoring opportunities. With the ground game, they got to continue finding the end zone, and again, just continue to establish the pass.
Anything to add, Anthony?
I guess the one thing that I do have to briefly mention that I guess we might have talked about was the sacks. Obviously, Stony Brook, they got the big one on Zach Wynn, but even just with Tykel Fields in general, he has had difficulty in the past when it comes to going under pressure and knowing when to make the right play. Now, against Delaware, he did make the right play. He had quick throws that he got under the blitz, or sometimes he would just take the sack instead of trying to force it and possibly throw an interception. He got sacked 3 times yesterday. And ultimately, that is one thing. If Stony Brook are to turn this around, this is something that he's going to have to keep in mind going down the stretch. Because teams, when it is 3rd down or 3rd and long, you're not going to, run the ball with Tyson Lawton more often than not. So being able to make the right decision under pressure is something that he's definitely going to need to work on into the rest of the season, but even towards the future.